Yes, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to join your conversation. It's my colleague, Greg Prickman, the librarian at the Folger Shakespeare Library, who is more closely involved in your conversations on a regular basis. But he brought me into discussion a couple months ago as you were thinking about the possibilities for this roundtable discussion. So again, really pleased and honored to be involved. The perspective I bring, as Marianne just said, is the perspective from the research center at an independent research library in America. The Folger Institute offers a variety of formally defined, organized, and funded opportunities to come conduct research at the Folger. Those opportunities range from seminars, workshops, the occasional large-scale conference, though those are hard for us because we don't have a space where we can gather a large audience. Those opportunities also include independent research fellowships, and very recently we have offered a pilot collaborative research initiative. So again, we have a variety of opportunities to bring scholars together for collections-based research. Now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I think I've done that. Now, it's a coincidence of timing that set us on the program that I'm here to discuss today. And the coincidence had to do with the fact that the Folger Institute celebrated its 50th anniversary in the summer of 2020. We didn't yet have specific programming plans for that anniversary, but we announced it with our brochure, with a gold colorways for, and a specially commissioned seal, wax seal-like thing, indicating that we were here for 50 years. So I do think it's important to promote longevity and that a series of programs has been sustained over time. But as we approached this anniversary, we also had to ask what we were going to do with that anniversary. And it was a slightly complicated, already complicated question to be addressed because, again, this comes to the coincidences. The first coincidence, or the first circumstance, was that the Folger Library was going to be closed for a multi-year renovation. The Folger did close in early 2020. Our renovation project goes on. We are currently hoping to get back into the building and back into all the programming and taking on new kinds of programming sometime in the year 2023. But as we were in the Institute contemplating our anniversary and thinking about what it means to celebrate that, mark it, do we critique our work? The one thing we did do before we closed was host a reception for our scholars, as we do on an annual basis. And for this activity, we brought together a team of scholars from around the fields in which research is supported at the Folger. The Folger has a particular challenge, opportunity and challenge, with its very name, Folger Shakespeare Library. Shakespeare's our middle name. It's always been clear to people. And the Folger as an institution is now nearing 90 years. It's always been clear that Shakespeare studies are well supported. The history of Shakespearean texts and performance is well supported at the Folger, but the collection is much broader and deeper. And I do believe from the very beginning of the foundation of the Folger Institute that that was part of our mission, to help people understand that it's a much wider collection and can support research in many different areas. I alluded, now this is a pretty fancy backdrop for a roundtable discussion that I'm illustrating here. And I have to say, it goes back to the spaces we have to work with. The largest space we have to work with is the theater. This was the set for a new theater production when we were having our roundtable discussion, but we were bringing people together from fields of British political thought, Shakespeare and performance, the history of science, a variety of fields, because again, that's what we try to do, make sure that people understand across these fields that work can be done and understand what can be accomplished when we bring people together in interdisciplinary conversations. So as this slide indicates, we were already wondering, as we were facing closure of the Folger, what the effects on our intellectual communities were going to be. But the two effects that we understood at that time were new technologies, specifically lots of materials available in digital forms, maybe reducing the perceived need to come and work in a library in person, and also the challenges to our sense of community once we were more dispersed. And then I would also say, not here on this slide, but very much in our thoughts already, were the the challenges of funding so much travel to the Folger, the challenges of having such a large carbon footprint in our programming. And then already though, in this slide, you can see by the time we put up a little presentation of some of the discussion and the transcription from the discussion on our webpage, things had already changed. So as it says, now in recent months, we've experienced all that and more. Well, of course, what was all of that? All of that was the pandemic. It was the murder of George Floyd. It was the economic collapse, which continues to have impacts on the humanities and higher education generally. We had put plans in place to move programming off-site. But by the time that academic year began, everything had changed. Everything was delayed. Things were going online, but many more things were simply delayed. So what do we do? What do we do now? Our anniversary, we never meant to simply pat ourselves on the back with our anniversary, but suddenly it became really clear to us that the thing to do with an anniversary is to recommit to your mission, to rethink what your mission is, and recommit to it and promote that mission. So again, all of a sudden, this has everything to do with the murder of George Floyd, and it has a lot to do too with the fact that we're located on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. We are in the nation's capital representing the humanities. What do we do with that opportunity? What do we take as our responsibilities? It all of a sudden, again, it was clear we had to recommit to our mission by addressing what we took to be the most urgent need in scholarly conversation. And that was to address what we're calling the prehistory of modern racialized thinking and racism. So over the course of this anniversary year, we sponsored, I think it was in total 9 online discussions, critical race conversations, we called them. We took what I think of as a lighthouse beacon approach. As we watched that beacon circle around, we asked ourselves, what do we hit on? What are the various fields? Where are the conversations in these fields about pre-modern race, our understanding of race in the pre-modern period and what the legacies are? Again, where is the state of this scholarly conversation? Our initial thought was that we were offering a form of faculty professional development. Not only did we feel the need, urgent, sudden, pressing need to get up to speed, as it were, on where these scholarly conversations were, but we were pretty sure all of our constituents and audiences also did need a form of professional development, and we decided to offer that through this series of online conversations. What voices could we elevate? We asked ourselves. Where are scholars pushing ahead with understandings of early modern race? And here you can see, this is actually the YouTube playlist of the set. You could see work across fields: the American South. What did cultural contact look like in the Mississippi Delta? There were many returns to Shakespeare in this series because, again, Shakespeare is our middle name, but we looked through to include food history. Our collaborative research project was about, we called it Before Farm to Table, Early Modern Food and Foodways and Cultures. So we brought to the promotion that conversation. We have a Center for the History of Political Thought. We brought to prominence the conversation in that area: pre-modern race and religion. You can see the range. The most powerful and successful thing we accomplished was also the simplest. We opened the doors. I talked earlier about the work that we do at the Institute, organizing formal funded programs. These are almost inevitably programs that come with application processes, or at a minimum, a registration process. The application process is generally a critical component of our work because there is funding involved. With this set of conversations, again, with the need to move to an online format, we almost immediately discovered how much we could accomplish by just opening our doors. The very first of these conversations was the one that's it's in the bottom row towards the left, second from left: cultivating an anti-racist pedagogy. We offered that in the summer of 2020. And very much thinking that this was, again, a kind of professional development, helping people get up to speed as they were working on their syllabi for the fall. We had in real time, and we have run all of these on YouTube, just streaming in real time, and people could join in. We had over 600 participants in that midsummer conversation. In the 50-year history of the Folger Institute, we've never before had more than 400 participants in any single program. So that was astonishing to us. Now you can see there are close to 7,000 views of that. These all stay online available. There are transcripts now available for each of them, and also 5-minute clips for each of these sessions. Again, we opened the doors. We understood that we were opening the doors to scholars. Our Folger colleagues across the institution also promoted these conversations. Then those are people who work with high school teachers. They are people who work with our donors and members. They all opened the doors and helped promote these conversations. And what we saw, I think what we continue to see, is a real hunger for insight into scholarly conversations. And that has been both gratifying and humbling. What I want to do is just give you a few, a glimpse into the conversation in one of these conversations. I'm only giving you a few screenshots because I know it's a little complicated technologically, and you get some delays when you try to play video through Zoom. So I'm giving you a few screenshots here from the conversation that had the most direct impacts and resonances with the work we do. And that was a conversation about race and the archive. We invited Urvashi Chakravarti and Brandy Adams together. Urvashi had recently had a long-term fellowship at the Folger. And so she's intimately familiar with the Folger collections and how they support or do not support her work on racial thinking. And she also then, of course, has a year's experience of working in the Folger as a person of color. And here's just a couple of conversation starters, or really questions that she asked. And again, they're questions that resonate deeply for us with our own, in terms of our own work. Who gets to go to the archive? Oh, I should say, we are using archive. They are using archive in a very loose metaphorical sense of the word. Who gets to go to the archive? This, of course, includes questions of permissions, funding, gatekeeping. What credentials do you need to present at the door? That whole realm of questions. How does the physical space of the archive operate? Here, they're asking to, in terms of welcoming, in terms of being made to feel your difference or not as a reader, that's our terminology at the Folger, a reader at the library. But the physical space is also being alluded to in terms of geographical location. I've already said the Folger is on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. The other archives that our scholars in the U.S. in the early modern period would be working at primarily include the Newberry Library on the Gold Coast of Chicago and the Huntington in Pasadena, or the glorious situation of the Huntington Library in Pasadena. A few other questions. Who has the financial resources to travel? And why does that matter? In addition to supporting your status as a researcher, when you can say you've consulted rare materials, the question of your ability to travel also has an impact on the question of your sense of belonging in the network of scholars who are traveling on a regular basis to libraries. Are you fully in or not this scholarly community? What kind of work fits into the traditional archival research model? And this, of course, touches on some of the deep existential questions about the nature of our collections, what has been collected, what kinds of questions and topics can be immediately addressed and easily, readily, understandably addressed by those collections, what kinds of questions cannot be. I think I've got two more questions. Is the archive demanding or rewarding a particular kind of affect? And is that a white affect with this sense of neutrality, studied neutrality of the archive? Does that reward an easy and perhaps likely biased understanding of the archive? And then finally, I think this was the last question that Urvashi asked in this sequence. What do we do with the discourse of discovery? Why does it matter so much to us to talk about things we've discovered in the archive when, for the most part, we've discovered them because they've been carefully collected, carefully cataloged, carefully preserved? What is the labor that we are erasing when we as scholars talk about the discoveries we're making in the archive? And why does that initial ability to name or claim something as our own, why is that something that we're celebrating as a scholarly community? So I'm going to stop sharing there and say again, this was a conversation that was very directly challenging and provocative for those of us who were hosting the conversation. It demanded that we do what we said we were going to do, and that was listen, elevate marginalized voices, and now it gives us so much to work with, and it challenges us to find productive and generative and more inclusive ways of doing our work in the archive as we bring in these perspectives to our work. And so just for instance, we have to think very carefully now about how we're introducing graduate students, because that is one of the things we do with Folger Institute programs. We're bringing graduate students in and training them in archival methods and resources. Can we any longer act as if the archive is a neutral place, or the archive is a place that even-handedly is going to support any research projects? No, of course, we cannot. We need to start talking about working with the grain, working against the grain. There's some scholarly conversation about that, how you can productively undertake research projects that are not as obviously supported by evidence, that the standard of evidence that has been traditionally applied. So again, just a few last remarks. We found audiences, and we found larger audiences. We didn't even mean initially to address the general public audiences, but clearly we have. It tells us a lot about those audiences out there, the hunger to hear real scholarly perspectives. We found that we've now set standards for ourselves that we have to, in some cases, continue to work to meet. And again, we found that we have to approach what we have to offer in a new way. This gives us some new terms of discussion amongst ourselves in the scholarly community and the librarian community at the Folger. Thank you.
Wonderful. I thought that was a really nice presentation, but also a very enviable a set of experiences that you've had. Certainly one that I followed on Twitter, where it caused quite a stir and quite a buzz, I think. So that was excellent. I also want to thank you for the hopeful note that you are sounding, that all this work leads to a new audience and a wider audience for our collections, which is, after all, why we're doing all the work. Can I ask the audience whether they have questions for Kathleen? If you pop on your camera, then we can see that you've got a question. If not, then I have a question, I think probably for all four speakers. What do you do with inappropriate language that you've replaced with more appropriate language? Do you delete it? Do you record it somewhere? Do you hide it? Do you still make it visible? I have no idea. So what is the approach that people are taking towards language, inappropriate cataloging language that they are replacing? Lars, did you want to say something about that?
For the present, I don't think we are actually doing.
You're very quiet. I don't know why that.
I have to just put on my microphone. For the moment, I don't think we're really doing anything, waiting for the policy to be implemented. But in the future, I suspect that we will be preserving older metadata, even if it's not appropriate today, but in a context where we make it clear that we have switched to more present terms, and that the old metadata is not something that we stand for today, something like that, I suppose.
And Hans?
Well, because it's a classification, we have concept definitions, but in addition to that, a classification has an entry vocabulary, which consists of keywords. So you can show the concept definition, but you can still preserve the offensive words or the words that are used quite generally to find things as a keyword. So you can add a sort of a scope node or annotation in the concept definition itself, but still make sure that people who are using the wrong words or the old-fashioned words or the words that are actually used in the documents in the 19th century and in the 18th century, that they can still find the documents they need to start doing research. So I wouldn't call it the best of both worlds, but we can keep the one and still replace it with the other. So yep. It's an advantage.
And Alan?
I think it's a conversation that we still need to really have internally, and I'm sure there are different perspectives on this. I think many of the catalogues that we are concerned about are obviously legacy catalogues which exist as artifacts in their own right from the and we won't be changing them. What we'll be changing is our active metadata.
Yep.
And our ability to, change that or replace that at the moment is dependent on the systems in which it's hosted. And it may not be practical or efficient to retain metadata in those systems. And if it's not, then we won't. That's my view.
We are finding it useful to bring Raymond Williams's keywords into conversation with keyword searching. Again, in the context of introducing graduate students to research projects, and it allows us to talk about evolution on both fronts. Evolution in terms of search terms themselves, but also language as not a fixed entity, but always evolving, always complex, meaning different things, containing multiple meanings depending on the context of the discourse. And again, just initially, we're finding that a useful exercise.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So,
I
sorry.
just wanted to add that metadata and catalogs are, of course, also part of our collections, and by that, an aspect of our common cultural heritage. To destroy or erase metadata would also be to prevent research into our own history and the cultural heritage of our institutions. I think that would be a pity.
No.
I'm not saying that we destroy it. I'm saying that it doesn't necessarily belong in our current catalogue.
I was not referring to you, just to general discussion.
Yeah, so I think in general, this afternoon has taught me that I don't think we are about erasing our history, and that includes the language that we used in our catalogues, but actually to try and make sure that we put it in an appropriate context and in a sensitive context that is appropriate to our end users. I don't think we've come to the end of our conversation, but Lars had his hand up. Did you want to add something, a final comment? Lars?
It was just a thumbs up.
A thumbs up. Good. It's a very small screen.
Yeah.
So in that case, I think we haven't come to the end of the conversation, but we've come to the end of this session. As I said at the top of the session, we would be very keen to organize a follow-up to highlight some of the further topics that are that were raised today, but we didn't have time to discuss. Like I've written down sensitive material. because today's one group's sensitive material might not be another person's sensitive material. There's some article about skaters or people who are determining descriptions of clothes and clothing items, for example. So what I would like to invite you to do is to keep the conversation in your own institutions and among institutions in your own country. If you have topics for a follow-up session that could be organized by CERL, then send them to me. I've already got a few speakers lined up, so we can quite happily carry on with the conversation. And I would like to thank the speakers once again. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentations. They will be online on YouTube next week, I think. And thank you very much, and wishing you a very good evening.